Good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing to you today Joe Jarzombek. Joe is actually the Director for Software Assurance, and he leads the government interagency public and private collaboration efforts with industry, academia, and standards organizations to shift the security paradigm from something that's been very reactive with kind of a patch cycle mentality to that which is very proactive to build, test, and then deploy throughout the life cycle through security education and training. Joe Jarzombek, he addresses the Department of Homeland Security, cybersecurity initiatives focused on mitigating risks attributable to exploitable software and how public and private collaboration is necessary to improve this whole landscape of cybersecurity itself. I was actually very privileged to be on a panel with Joe in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed his contributions to the panel, so I'm sure that the talk of the year is going to be equally stimulating as well. Today, Joe is actually going to be addressing means for measuring software security and mitigating risks of zero-day exploits. So over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Mano. First of all, I have to, for those of you who don't know, Mano Paul was recently recognized by ISC Squared for his leadership in information security management. So it's very commendable for his industry-led efforts for helping the community. I'm glad you're here today. This is the end of October, which is for us National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And I think it's kind of appropriate because last month we actually acknowledged a 10-year anniversary of perhaps the most defining event in U.S. history that caused the stand-up of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. That was 9/11. And 9/11 to me was the classic zero-day attack. And it's from the message here is that you have to understand zero-day attacks are actually preventable. In fact, the message is zero-day attacks are a nice way and a nice convenient way of blaming somebody else on the fact that there are exploit points that we could have done something about, but for whatever reason, we have chosen not to do that. And in the area of software in particular, every one of these are preventable. And so if we get into that, what you understand is that the classic example of looking at 9/11 was the fact that this was a convergence of different disciplines, but what we're finding out in cyberspace, it becomes a convergence of not just cyber, but with the physical, and it's a convergence of disciplines. It's no one discipline can fix this. The idea that says security is going to do it, it's not going to do it. And when we looked at what happened on 9/11, this was a classic case of systems that had been determined to be safe, meaning that they were designed, built, deployed, and operated to be safe, but because they weren't designed, built, deployed, and operated to be secure, hundreds of people died. And I always wondered about that, and I talked to the guys about it. I said, how is it that you determined this and declared these systems safe when people died? And they said, well, the security guys, we didn't. I said, wait a minute. But even from a safety perspective, which, by the way, has a lot of statutory, regulatory guidance, we've got laws behind it that says you had to at least make assumptions about security. And the bottom line is they didn't. And so the message that we're going to be talking about here is understanding how all the players come. This is a team sport when we come together. And there will also be people who say, well, you know, security, that's really hard. And they'll say it's expensive. And I say, based on the way we do it today, I agree with you. Because for the most part, now, and I realize I'm preaching to the choir here, but most people practice security afterwards. They bring in security to fix things afterwards. And when you do that, it is going to be much more expensive because you're trying to bolt this on. And so what happens is security, the way we do it today, not only does it cost you more or it slows you down, and in fact, it to the point when you're putting in firewalls, DMZs, and everything else, because why? Because we have this fundamentally flawed infrastructure built on software that we didn't think about security from that perspective. And built-in security, the message here is that it actually enables resilience of our enterprises. If you have secure products in the first place, you don't have to do all these other things. Very much like brakes. Brakes aren't there to stop you. Brakes are actually are things that enable you to go fast because it gives you control. Built-in security gives you control, and more particularly, it gives you resilience for what you're focused on. Now, our focus within the Department of Homeland Security is looking at our nation's critical infrastructure, for which the federal government does not own or operate. We have to do a lot of collaboration with those who own these and operate those aspects, but when we look at these, the more you peel back of this, because most people think about the physical infrastructure, they're all enabled or controlled by software. And in fact, it's not just about control systems, but it's the application software that runs these things. And the more and more you look at it, you peel it back, you understand that they're fundamentally flawed. And in fact, you almost don't want to know what they're doing on there. But we understand that's our big risk component. But we also understand that they're all interconnected. And we know that one organization's risk, if you're interconnected with them, become your risk as well. But then we hear people say, but we have security. We've put in our firewalls. We have that DMZ. We implement security. A lot of people put in security features, and we wonder, why is it that we're still being breached? Why is the hacking still going on? Well, fundamentally, it's because they're not going through your security controls. They're going through your application software. And you've heard in some of the presentations here, and Michael Howard even talked about it in his, is that the way they're getting around these systems, they are not going through your security controls. They are going through the application software, and you're familiar with those terms, SQL injection, buffer overflow. But we've actually codified these and to a measurable, discernible way so that you can talk about these things, and we can actually put it within a business context of why you should care about this. Meaning, if you have a buffer overflow, there is an exploit associated with it, that there's also a mission risk associated with it. And so people simply aren't going, they're going around that. And what's interesting is exploitable software weaknesses are the sources for future zero-day attacks. And that's why I said, if you have a zero-day attack, it's a very convenient way of saying, but it's not my fault. And in fact, we've gone in and talked to organizations and say, do you realize that we can go in and do static code analysis? I mean, this is very simple at the code level, but even you can bring in experts to look at. And we can say, here's all your exploit points. I've literally had people tell me, why would I want to know that? And that's kind of a sad statement, because you understand what they're admitting. They're saying, if you tell me where my exploit points are and I don't do anything about it, and then we get breached, now I'm responsible. But if I can say I didn't know anything about that somehow, well, that's somebody else's fault. That's our challenge point today. However, Congress is actually starting